Starting wet, let the bead flow. I have my arches paper and I'm putting a liberal amount of water on the top surface of the paper. I also have some plexiglass underneath, which I wet thoroughly, and then I place that on top of the wet and continue wetting the top of the paper until it gets floppy. Then put some more water underneath the glass. Any kind of hard surface that's not porous works well for the wet paper technique. In order to understand the bead, we have to wet and saturate the paper with water so all the fibers are full. Wait about 3 or 4 minutes, and if it still have water on the top, just pat it off with a little paper towel or a soft rag. And now the paper's ready. See, it just flops right down. Prepare a mixture of yellow ochre and Hansa yellow. You can also use a cadmium light. Make sure your paper is tilted. I've put that little thing underneath to tilt it to about 30 degrees, and I gently rub on the watery solution of paint. Those are the two colors, not 3, just 2. Yellow ochre will look a little funny at first, as you saw in the other lessons. There's our sketch, but it will sink into the paper, and with the Hansa yellow it makes a great underpainting. Picture this 50% lighter, and that's what's going to happen. The paint's going to go way into the paper. Here comes the first example of the bead. I fill my brush with the phthalo. It's still fairly watery. I swiped the top of the painting where it's wet, and on the right hand side you can see the water flowing down. That's the bead of water we're looking at. As long as you can keep that flowing and the paper glistening wet, you can direct the bead of water by tilting the paper, laying it flat. Will stop it from flowing too much, but also look how white the paper is when I use a damp brush to lift off the paint. In the initial stages, the paint is still sitting on top of the paper, and the pigment is mixed into the molecules of water, and when the water dries, the paint is left behind, but you can lift it. Now there's our sketch. Keep that in mind, because now we're moving to the foreground. A couple swipes of blue, which would be the sky reflecting. Take a quick peek at the top, see how the sky is melting down, and I tilt the paper so that I keep the same feeling of softness through the painting right now. Now I'm taking a little bit of burnt sienna, and I'm going to be adding it to the sky mixture. I want to deepen the sky. I want to increase the amount of yellow or warmth in the sky. So swipe on the left, get a little more. There we go. Burnt sienna is one of the earth tones that works well in a sky, especially a morning sky. As I check back to my little sketches, you can see I've already determined what it will look like when it's dry. Never judge a watercolor when it's wet. You might have fun when it's wet, but you'll know if it was effective after it dries. So always mix the colors a little stronger than you think, because they dry lighter. So I don't want it in the middle, I want it either below the middle or above the middle. It makes for a better design. And then we're just wiping it through. making a mid-ground shape, which corresponds to my little sketch and yours. Always keep that thumbnail handy. You see the tilting again? I can control the bead. All the paper is still wet everywhere. It's starting to, the pigment is starting to settle. There, you see, whatever's up there, put it down below. That's called an echo. Now remember, I haven't used a lot of colors here. Basically, I've used a yellow and a blue and an earth tone. That nice little spatter was fun. Now I consult my sketch and go, I think it's time for some violet. Violet is a wonderful color, but only certain reds and blues will make a good violet. Alizarin and phthalo are a perfect combination. Another one is cobalt and alizarin. So here we go. We're going to start putting in some deeper purples. Now you might think that's too dark, but that will dry 50% lighter. And the reason being, that's just the way the pigments work. So here we're going to start the tree at the base. Now remember our little exercise we had on the tree's feet. Trees have feet. So make sure your tree just has a little something at the bottom. It can be like a rock, or it can have a, you can actually make the tree come out a bit on the right or the left, but anchor it into the ground. That's the shadow. Consulting the sketch, the shadow hits the ground and forms a representation of the tree on the ground. And you don't have to be completely faithful. You can make up your own shadow shapes. There's a little more spatter. You know, when I'm feeling a little bit tight, I'll just do a little spatter. It just loosens up everything. Now here's consulting the sketch. I remember that there's a dark section on the right-hand side of the painting. I'm just using my little squirrel hair. There it is, right there. See? So little dark spots are being identified and placed. Time for some really dark paint now. I take a little bit of the sky color, a little bit of the red, a little bit of the alizarin, that's the red, and some Payne's gray. We're putting in the dark spot there. This is pretty bold. Remember, think about it and then be bold. Don't just be bold and then start thinking. It'll be out of control. So darkening things, very important. I've put in the mid-tones, I've put in the light tones, and now I'm putting in the dark tones. But believe it or not, those dark tones will be mid-tones when they're dry. So it's very interesting working on very wet paper. Things disperse, they spread out, and you can control the spreading with a paper towel if you need to. But always go back to your sketch. When you see what you're doing here, this is a dry flat brush. I am now putting in the birch tree. The brush is lifting the paint away from the paper. It'll take a few. I could have done this earlier, but I like to have the sky color really down into the paper a bit. And then I like to lift 3 or 4 times gently with the flat brush. That's a Robert Simon's flat brush. And as I go up, give a nice gentle curve. You can see that it's coming off pretty easily. And we've been painting for about 9 minutes, so that water has still staying in the paper. And then I lift off a branch. Look at all that paint. It's starting to take form. When you're doing a watercolor, the beginning should look like a fog. And then as the paper dries, you learn how to control the bead. The paint starts to lighten and go deep into the paper. And you can just rearrange it if you need to. More dark. Remember the dark I put on about 45 seconds ago? It's sunk right in. Now, The paper is beautifully damp now. See, it doesn't disperse all over the place. So I can start to put some small darks in. Now I lift off the landform underneath to expose the water. And I also made it a little higher and took the bottom of that landform to form the reflection. Once again, I'm using the flat brush very gently, lifting the paint. Well, that completes this section, the lay-in. We'll let that dry, and then we'll be adding the final details of this watercolor. Good beginnings make great endings. See you in the next section.